Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kersner.
Hello and welcome to episode 72 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now, and I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this amazing present moment. The title and topic for today's podcast is, Why is it so hard to be present? And I chose this topic because I sat and reflected back over the duration of my career as a licensed acupuncturist, but also reflecting back to my path and my challenges and my struggles in relation to presence and being present, and my perceptions and things that made it difficult and hard to be present. A question that I receive on this topic many times over the past few years, over the past 13 years, is why is it so hard to be present? Why is it so difficult? Why is it so challenging? And due to the subjectivity of this reality, there are so many different factors that could be inhibiting your ability to be present, that are creating the challenge to achieve presence. And it's not like you achieve presence and you're just present, but to get yourself back or to maintain presence. And I will say that there are moments that it is far easier to be present than others. So let's start off at one of the biggest reasons, or one of the biggest challenges we face at being present, which is the ego, which is the loud voice in your head. It's been my honor and certainly pleasure to be one of the first people to sit in front of the patients I work with and let them know that they don't have to listen to the voice in their head. And I'm saying this and sharing this with you, the listeners of this podcast. You no longer have to listen to the voice in your head. It's time to start distancing yourself from it. It's your ego. It's a voice that is not you, but the ego is so tricky that it uses the tone of your voice in your head to make you believe it's you. And the real tragedy here is that this information isn't shared with us at a much younger age, because if you think about it, it has the propensity to change one's life immediately. And unfortunately, we are raised to be associated with, and commanded by the ego, which is a very matrix conditioning control mechanism. Because the ego is formed usually and typically at a younger age, and typically in a time of challenge. And it never really fully matures, and it runs the same programs over and over again. Now, I'm sure you've heard that having a strong ego can be helpful. And it's actually quite the contrary, but of course, in the matrix, the way that we're raised in this society, that's a misnomer, it's a trick. I mean, how often does the voice in your head actually make you feel better about yourself? And I'm not talking about the quieter, more subtle voice that we can access in meditation. I'm talking about the loud voice that's constantly making you worry, constantly making you think about things you don't want to think about, constantly making you think about the past. Worry, anxiety, stress, depression. What do you think's at the heart of that? It's an ego that doesn't stop, that's relentless, that will keep breaking you down. Now, everyone on Earth, 7+ billion people, have an ego. And the amazing part is that this ego is designed specifically for the individual. So we all have opportunities to work through and do our ego work. But the ego is the primary challenge to being present. So if you ask a question like, why is it so hard to be present? My question to you is, how much ego work have you done are you listening to that voice in your head, and why? Now, I understand that it might have not happened for you, that someone presented this to you, but now I have. And I'm telling you and asking you to stop listening to the voice in your head. And you might ask, well, how? And the first place to start is through observation, through watching one's mind. It's not about fighting the ego or controlling the ego, especially in the beginning. It's about observing the ego and watching what it's doing. The ego generally is purposeless in the present moment. Now, it's not to say that there aren't moments that it's not helpful, but it's far and few, maybe 5%, less than 5% of the time. The ego is a mental construct, and it was certainly useful when humans were living on the Serengeti and getting chased by lions, because then you needed to stay in a state of vigilance. But most of us live in suburbia or similar structures where we have no true existential threat most of the time. So without that threat, the ego is powerless. And what's happened is that the ego now creates problems for us so that there's a need to listen to and to serve the ego. Because the ego's primary objective is control, and it does this through creating emotional reactions. It does this by generating different worries and fears. It does this by playing mental movies in your head. I know this because I had, and I've done a lot of ego work, so I could say I had an ego that was very destructive. And it would play mental movies over and over and over again, constantly taking me out of the present moment. It would make me worry about things that might happen in the future. And how much preparation have I done for a future that's never happened? And what do you think's behind it? It's the ego creating these dystopian future thoughts that never happen, that are never going to happen. 99% of our mental planning never happens. But why do we do it? We do it because we have that voice in our head that we're convinced is us, but it's not. It's a construct of our personality, telling us things and triggering us into a fear state. And we think that if we react to that it'll somehow calm down, and it actually doesn't. It perpetuates itself because your ego is always there. It's always studying and waiting for opportunities to jump in, to pull you out of the present moment. So what do we do now? Well, we get into a state of observation. And how do we do that? We use our presence tools. And, in my second podcast, I talked about creating that mindfulness practice. But all throughout the podcast series, I've talked about different tools and methodologies and ways to gain presence, to work your way back to the present moment. The state of observation, a state of observation, is the most important state for all of us. So when I give you these instructions to stop listening to the voice in your head, it's not so easy that you're going to stop. What I am suggesting is to start watching the voice in your head, watching the thoughts. The analogy is to allow those thoughts to pass by like clouds in the sky. And that's easier said than done, because in the beginning, when you start observing your ego, you're going to be blown away by the things it tells you. It's so tricky. But really, all it's doing is creating suffering, and it's leading you by using negative motivators. And negative motivators are one of the root constructs of the matrix mind poisoning that we're instilled at such a young age. Negative motivators will never take you to a positive place, and the ego uses negative motivators all the time. If you just do this, this won't happen. If you just worry about this, this won't happen. That's not the case at all. Where you put your attention toward, you create more of. The ego knows this. But in our hearts, we believe that if we just prepare for this, it won't happen. If we just worry about this, it won't happen. If we just remember that traumatic experience, we can protect ourselves from it happening again. But what does that do? It just re-traumatizes us. And what thrives in trauma? The ego thrives in trauma. So why is it so hard to be present? Well, first and foremost, your ego is making it extremely hard for you to be present. You're associated to the mental images, the mental imagery, the mental thoughts and constructs that have nothing to do with the present moment. 99% of the time in your present moment, you're okay. Things are okay. Literally. But it's not the same in your mind. It's not the same with your ego. Things are not okay. How do we get okay? First and foremost, stay in a state of observation without judgment. Watch your ego. Don't fight it. Don't confront it. Just watch. Watch the thoughts. See it for what they are. They're just thoughts. But you can also start to watch how those thoughts are so triggering. And if you do this without judgment, you can reflect back to see how many times your ego has been able to trick you and fool you and convince you into something that is not true at all. Truth lies in the present moment. And that's what this whole podcast has been about. This whole podcast has been about reducing your self-inflicted suffering. And we've talked about what's at the heart of self-inflicted suffering, which is the ego, which is why it's so hard for you to be present. Now, I understand that there are different struggles. There's adversity that we go through that makes it harder in different moments to be present. So, of course, it's going to be more challenging at some points than others to get yourself back to the present moment, to calm your mind, to calm your nervous system down. That's when you're really being asked to use all your presence tools. And there are so many, and you have to find which ones speak to you, and not only find which ones speak to you and which ones are useful, but actually use them. And sometimes the challenge is that you get pulled out of the present moment for a certain duration of time, and then you catch yourself. But the problem is, in that moment, the challenge is in that moment, is that the ego is going to say, well, why didn't you catch this before? That's when you have to soften up a little bit. You have to be reassuring to yourself and say, that's not the way I'm going to look at it. I'm going to be grateful that I caught myself, and now I'm going to use all my tools to calm myself and bring myself back to the moment where I am okay and I am safe. How you do that and with what presence tools is subjective. I have gone through so many notebooks doing my 555 affirmations. So many. I've used so many different tools. Listened to so many guided meditations, binaural beats, whatever I needed in that moment, I used over and over and over again to pull myself back. That's how insidious of an ego that I had. And I say had because I've worked so diligently and so hard with my ego, not to fight my ego or destroy my ego, but with my ego to have a better relationship so that I could be present more often than not. I might talk about presence a lot with my patients. It doesn't mean that I'm present all the time, but it means that I do have the tools and the willingness to be present, to understand the need for presence, to understand the duality of not being present so that I can be present. I really do find it an honor and a privilege to tell you that you don't have to listen to the voice in your head. You don't. That's your choice. It is a choice that you have to make over and over and over again. I do not and will not use the word easy because that would just trivialize the challenges and the opportunities that exist for you and for me, because this work is not easy and it shouldn't be. You must earn your presence. It is a gift worth earning. It is a feeling space, a state of being worth earning. And it must be earned over and over and over again. From this point forward, no longer are required to listen to that voice. When you do, realize that it's a choice. If you do, it's okay. It's been like that for a long time. Your ego has been the CEO of your life, and you didn't even know it. And the problem is that not only has your ego been the CEO of your life, you haven't even been on the executive team. You're a cog all the way down on the organizational chart, and now is the time to demote the ego, not through force, but through awareness, to say, no more. I'm not listening to you anymore. I don't need to anymore. You're not helpful anymore. And again, not to be combative, Your ego knows you very, very well and will win every single time. So it's not a battle between you and your ego. It's a shift in relationship and understanding of what the ego is, what it's done to you, what it's doing for you, which is not positive at all, not even neutral. All it's doing is trying to take you out of the present moment. And so I understand in the beginning, it could be a little frustrating because when you start doing this work and understanding that the reason why it's so hard to be present is your ego, the ego will act up. That's okay. That means you're actually getting somewhere. And it will quiet down, and you'll go through periods, peaks and valleys, where your ego will be more vocal than other times. Just keep moving forward. Keep doing your work. Keep observing the thoughts in your head. At times it might seem suffocating. It was for me, for long expanses. That's how destructive my ego was. But I sit in front of you to let you know that if you commit yourself to doing the work, there will come a time where you will get better and better at it, working with your ego. You will have more opportunities to be present and enter into a state of peace within, which will reflect your state without. It always starts within, your inner environment, and then your outer environment will reflect. So let me just take this opportunity one more time to tell you it is truly an honor and a privilege to share this information with you. I know how pivotal it's been for myself and also for the patients that I've worked with to hear this information from someone who has lived it. And I've worked it relentlessly. And it's never over. I haven't achieved anything. I constantly work at it. Because my ego is never going to fully disappear. It's not about destroying it at all. I'll never be a man with no ego. That's not the way. I'm a man with an ego that continues to do ego work and is committed to doing ego work through the rest of my time on earth. And this is what I ask of you, to do the same, to make that commitment. And it is my hope that you will join me in this endeavor, because it will lead you to a place where you will achieve more peace. And with that said, I want to thank you for sharing these precious and amazing present moments. They are each a gift, and we must treasure all of them. Peace be with you.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.